Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organizational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. Welcome to today's episode of Two Homes, and today we're delving into default systems, particularly looking at hotel operations and how sustainable outcomes are not necessarily determined by strategy or policy, but actually the default systems at play. So we're thinking settings, systems, and assumptions that operate when no one's actually thinking about sustainability. So again, here that perhaps it's not integrated and people are just doing their jobs. And what is the default system? So if the default system is wasteful, then sustainability is going to feel like a big effort. And if the default system is integrated, it's more sustainable, then that's normalized and it will feel more effortless. So when the sustainable choice isn't the default, it's not going to happen consistently. I've talked about this. I'm going to continue to talk about this. It's going to be a common thread here. But it really is about the systems we design and how they reflect what we normalize. And so when no one's consciously thinking about sustainability, if it's not in people's reticular activating system, the system itself will fall back to defaults. So as James Clear says, people don't rise to the level of their intentions, they fall to the level of their systems. And when people are not deciding on sustainability every day, they're just going to follow the system that's already in place. So that's what we're talking about today, because like most of our operational behavior is automatic. It's not intentional. I think there's something like 90% of our daily actions are from habit or autopilot. So the examples we're going to have a look at are air conditioner settings, cleaning routines, procurement choices, waste handling, and guest communication in hotels. I thought that today it would be great to just dive into something like really practical and everyday. We've talked quite a bit about theory up until this point, about our inner and outer systems and so much of this like nervous system stuff. I thought it was important to start with that understanding. But today we're going to dive into something a bit more practical. So staff are people, we're all humans and we're functioning for the most part. This is our design. It's about using less energy, not in a lazy way, but in an efficient way. The human body is extremely efficient, and so most decisions are not really conscious. They're just the default operating system. When we look at people, be it staff on this occasion or even customers, they will follow the system that's set up. So today we're looking at like what the system is, what the sort of systems that staff are following, and why sustainability outcomes depend so heavily on system design, not on willpower. All right, let's take our first example. You walk into a hotel room and the air conditioner is blasting at 18 degrees Celsius. What this reveals that there are assumptions about energy usage, or even not assumptions, even is not a consideration on that operational level. So you might have engineering looking at, how do we reduce energy consumption? But if that's not operationalized through all of the layers, then, there's not much thought to that. There are, however, assumptions around guest comfort, and there's also system defaults. So what might be happening in this scenario? Housekeeping staff are working hard to hit cleaning quotas, and if you're running around cleaning a room, you're feeling quite hot. So firstly, that really cold temperature probably isn't that noticeable. And having worked in a lot of hot climate locations, when you walk into that chilly room, it actually feels refreshing at first. When the guest first enters, it's probably a relief, especially if they've been traveling, but it's quickly too cold. However, most guests are not going to change the thermostat. It's not necessarily on their preference, um, but they might not change it either. They kind of accept the default. And this happens across so many different areas. So here the default temperature is what the real policy is about. And this is where system design can change this. What if we were to change the default to 24 degrees Celsius as a baseline? The guests can still change it if they want to, but again, most of the time, they won't change it. So why do we bother? The thing is, once we start measuring and trying to drive down energy consumption, this is one of the quickest ways to achieve that, whilst still maintaining an excellent level of service, guest comfort, all of the rest of the things that are expected through the customer service and the guest journey. However, the actual energy consumption and costs will go down significantly, noticeably. If your property is part of an energy rating scheme, your score is going to improve. And if you're part of a certification program with continual improvement built in, this is also going to be a win. So what does that mean in real terms? It's around 5 to 10% reduction for every degree higher in temperature. So if we're shifting 6 degrees, then you're looking at 30 to 60% of savings. And this is the low-hanging fruit. Like there are many other things as well that can be used to impact the reduction of energy consumption. And often, often they're not discussed and they're overlooked. So by having these conversations with your team, by looking at where most energy is going, something simple like the change in temperature can really make a huge difference. And it still maintains, as I was saying, still, it doesn't lose anything from the guest experience. There are a lot of myths around this, a lot of conversations that, guests expect this, luxury requires this maybe, or the guests will complain. But here's the thing, is that most guests don't complain. In many cases, these assumptions are not really tested. So what is exciting is when there are hotel groups going out there and they are testing things, they're measuring different things to see what's going on. But often the case for air conditioning, I've seen case studies on reduction and so forth. It would actually be really cool to do some deeper diving into guest perceptions and needs. I know I personally find it always cold. You have the conversations between men and women in office workplaces as well, right? So it is a little nuanced, but this is about making the default system the better option. So there's always flexibility, but let's change our defaults to save energy, to save wastage, to save money, and just to be able to incorporate more sustainability. Okay, so we've talked about air conditioning in guest rooms, but there's energy consumption across the entire hotel. It's much bigger than just the rooms. So it begs the question of what are you tracking? Are you tracking energy consumption as a whole? Are you tracking seasonality? Are you tracking different areas of the hotel? What does that breakdown look like? How much is in the meeting room space? How much is in the food and beverage outlets, conferencing, back of house, etc.? So seeing where the energy is going the most. Yes, we know hotel rooms are very intensive on energy, but there is more than just that. So when I talk about not making it up to the guest to determine what is happening in there, yes, the room consumption is still part of it, but looking at these other areas gives you a lot more control over things as well. So as well as establishing a baseline that is more energy efficient, there is also the other areas, the other parts of the hotel to look at as well. And without measuring that, it's hard to know where the opportunities are to reduce it. So measurement, discussion with the team, starting to notice things, starting to activate your reticular activating system onto this topic to find creative solutions. And that will depend on the sophistication of the systems that you've got, on what the breakdown is, but it may be a bit more of a science experiment than that. And you may be able to determine that by looking at off-peak, on-peak, when guests' rooms are occupied, or doing a small audit of what is actually happening, measuring it for a week, extrapolating that information. You don't need to be there, with a thermometer and and trying to figure it all out every minute of every day. This doesn't need to be time consuming. It can be done in a smart way that gets you the data that you need to have the discussions, to make the changes that are necessary to make the improvements that will get you the results. Okay, our next example is the towel policy. This one is so famous, you're probably having a little chuckle right now, because this one is talked about consistently in sustainability, in tourism, and in other random conversations as well when we talk about travel. So there's a nice sign on the bed. It says, please hang up your towel if you want to use it again, or leave it on the floor in the bathtub if you're ready to get fresh towels. And guests will follow these instructions. Guests are actually very good at following instructions. They hang up their towel to reuse, and yet when they come back to their room, they find that it's been replaced anyway. So a few things happen here, and they can be really easily rectified. One of these things is that guests lose trust in the policy. They want to believe that they're doing the right thing while they're on holidays. Yes, there's always going to be exceptions to that, but most people want to do the right thing while they're on holidays. They lose trust that the right thing is being done, that it's being followed through on. The hotel loses as well, because they're still doing the same amount of laundry, so they're not getting all of the benefits of energy reduction, water reduction, and chemical use reduction for the cleaning products. Or if outsourcing to a third-party cleaning company, then the invoices are still staying at that higher level. So there's a huge opportunity that's missed in this space, and unfortunately, it seems to be quite prevalent across the industry. In this case, as in many cases, and I'm not blaming the hotel industry, it's just in observation, wide and far in sustainability, the systems place the burden on the guest. And even in this case, when the guest opts in, the system has failed to support that operationally. And, and that's one of the earlier, I guess, policies that have come into play, and it's still not being done effectively. So why do we bother with putting the sign out if it's not being followed anyway? The intention is there, but there is a disconnect in terms of the day-to-day. So how do we address that? How do we address that so that the system can start working as it was intended? I've heard some pretty creative ideas over the years, and I love the curiosity. I love the scientific approach. We do still seem to have a bit of a tendency to try one thing, and if it doesn't work, we don't try again. We think that it's still the system that's broken, or that thing was not the solution. And I'd love to see more trying many different things. And and continuing to explore what works in certain hotels or certain markets or in different ways. I think the other trap we fall into is thinking that just one thing is going to be the solution. And sometimes it's a little bit more than that. So some creative ways that I've heard over the time, one that's become quite popular is just cleaning the room every third day. Yes, that reduces the cleaning costs, but I'm not sure that it empowers the team to be part of the sustainability story. Sometimes there are incentives for guests, so it might be planting a tree, it might be a drink at the bar, it might be something else. So these have shown different kinds of results. Um, I, for one, tend to put my do not disturb sign up for the duration of a stay once I've tested and seen that my towel is indeed replaced. And I've even asked about that in hotels, and that method has been encouraged. So, like, none of these things in isolation are really going to change the system, and it's really putting the burden on the guest to make the move. So, how do we set up the system to support the more sustainable pathway without putting the onus on the guest? Like, there are, as I was saying, like, not in isolation, some of these things can be extremely um, great for communication, for guest involvement. I think the guests should be involved in the process as well, but they alone are not necessarily the way we could be leading from. So we see here there is an intent, but the system design fails. There's an operational misalignment, and often there are some blind spots or assumptions being made about certain things, as we talked about in terms of the air conditioning temperatures. A property might have an amazing, really solid sustainability policy. It might look great on paper, but it's lost in these everyday operational defaults. And the defaults reveal the culture of what's going on. So if sustainability is relying on the guest to signal what they want, if it's relying on staff to remember to do something differently, if it is relying on the sustainability team or sustainability person to keep reminding or nagging, then it's a very fragile system. And the way we can shift that is by making the default system supportive and integrated with sustainability so that staff don't have to think about it constantly. It just simply happens. So, good defaults look like a better air conditioning temperature, a more efficient temperature level, like easy to access, visible, obvious, refillable water systems, like not having single use amenities in the room, but perhaps available on request, of operational alignment with the policies. What's written on paper is actually what's done operationally, and waste systems that are easy to follow. This one as well, I'll just dig in a little bit here. Some conversations I've had in the past are that when there are separate waste bins in guest rooms, that guests don't always get it right, and so then they tend to default back to just a single bin. This is removing the guest from the conversation. So personally, if we want to really have an unspoken conversation about sustainability, then waste separation in rooms is part of that conversation with the guest, even if they get it wrong. It's still involving them in the conversation. Regardless of whether there are separate bins or not, housekeeping is still going to need to empty and sort those waste bins. Those are some of the like surface level things, certainly not all, it's not extensive. But the deeper indicator is really staff understanding of why the systems exist. And this comes back to the concept of embodied sustainability. When staff understand the reasons why, this becomes part of their customer service. Whilst it may seem challenging to incorporate sustainability in a luxury setting, I've actually found that the luxury hotels who've implemented and embedded sustainability deeply so that staff understand why are involved in that process, their customer service around this is even higher. And the comments and feedbacks and reviews they get from guests reflects this. So they're getting actual guest feedback complimenting them on their sustainability initiatives because it's been brought into the conversation, because it's not just the signaling of a sign about linen, because there is more than just those visual cues, because staff are inspired and proud of the initiatives that are going on. I actually find this is a really powerful part of sustainability, and it enhances luxury settings, and it creates a stronger sense of connection with guests, and it also creates a lot more pride in staff, because when staff members are involved, when they're able to answer guest questions about these kind of things, their attitudes and the culture and the behavior become more authentic. It's not just like, oh, this is written in a policy. They know it, so it becomes genuine. It becomes part of the story, part of the holiday for the guest. So this is really important if we're to embed sustainability, if we're to follow through, if the policies are going to look like that in reality as well. And to have this, staff need to have knowledge, authority, know the meaning why, and have the agency. Be empowered to make their own judgment calls. Be involved in shaping those policies and coming up with the solutions, and be supported by leadership, so that leadership are setting a certain standard and example, and also not feeling that they need to have all the answers, because when staff are involved and have buy-in and are included in the problem-solving part of it, they will be much more wedded to the outcomes, much more excited about delivering on that promise that they've helped shape. This addresses a couple of things. This helps with sustainability leader burnout, because they're no longer having to carry it alone. And it helps with staff engagement and pride and sense of ownership and authenticity in delivering on the sustainability promise that the guest has been told. The outside starts to look like the inside. The operations start to look like the policy more consistently over time. And the defaults and culture start to include sustainability in a meaningful way and in a way that lasts over time. Because if we want sustainability to be consistent, to continually improve, and to be held not by one person but by the entire company, we can't rely on constant effort and reminders. We need to design systems where the sustainable choice is the default, because these systems will shape behavior far more than intention ever will. And when we can challenge our inner assumptions and start to engage, to be scientists in how we set these things up, then we can design systems that create a more meaningful shift. So sometimes the most important thing we can do, the most powerful thing we can do, isn't creating a new strategy, but it's simply changing the default systems. Better for the guests, better for the staff, and better for the leadership team, and better for your sustainability reporting. So something I mentioned at the very start of the episode was about procurement, and let's go there now. There is so much upstream that can be changed, and something that I notice whenever I walk into a hotel room is I will look at, like, what are the amenities? What is the setup of the room? Are there single-use amenities in the bathroom? Is there individually wrapped soap? Is there small bottles of shampoo, conditioner, etc.? And where are they coming from? Are they like mass produced? Are they a local supplier? All of these kind of things. So this conversation needs to, encompass the procurement, because often in procurement things are set and forget. Oh, we've run out of this, put in another order. Or the orders more and more these days are on a subscription, or like an automatic renewal. And often when I'm having this conversation with teams around hotel amenities, wanting to get rid of single-use plastics in particular, it becomes a bit of a default to swap like for like. And that's only part of the story. There's a bigger opportunity to be had here. And again, involving the team, having the conversations and saying, like, what is actually being used? What is guest behavior? Are they taking it because it's there? Are they not using it? Are there things that need to be swapped out because they get old and they're being thrown away and wasted? Or is there something that's like maybe being used very occasionally, but not at all? So there is a bigger opportunity in terms of what's actually needed than what's actually needed in the room. And are there ways that things can be available on request that are of a better quality, or not plastic, or not seen as a single-use disposable item? You can still provide good quality service and a luxury experience for your guests without the waste. A beautiful example of that, a hotel that I worked with, they removed all of the amenities from the room, but they had like a really beautiful presentation of things if someone had forgotten. So say their luggage had been delayed by the airline or what have you, they had a lovely little pack that they could opt into should they need it. So it wasn't an expectation, it wasn't the default, but it was something that felt amazing if you were in that need. We could dial that up even further and say, it's sort of individual items beautifully presented on request can be an even better way of fulfilling the need of the guest in a tailored and nuanced way that minimizes the impact on the environment and the cost centers as well. It might seem like a better idea to go for the cheap option, but actually factoring in something that is used less often and making it nicer that the guest might continue to use after their stay is actually going to have a really lasting impression as well. Is it that it's a set and forget and these amenities are just going into the room? Or is there some more, again, scientific investigation that can happen here? And this is really fun. Like, this is an activity that I do with clients on site, and it really, it brings the awareness in, it brings the attention on it, and it is really delightful to participate in. And my clients really love this part of things. So it doesn't need to be onerous, it doesn't need to be boring. It can be interesting, and it can be illuminating, and it can be a really important way of like bringing the team together and getting some team cohesion. And this is also setting that baseline environment, like we're saying. The default system is that there are no single-use amenities, but the customer can opt in. And so then you're just getting the people who opt in. I know that there's plenty of people who love it. They love to take all the little bits and pieces out of the hotel rooms. And they might be a little bit disappointed initially with that change, but they're only taking them because they're there. I remember like years and years ago, visiting a friend's place, and their partner just had this gigantic bowl of shampoo and conditioners collected over the years and never used. They just sit there. So it's waste for the sake of it. We can gently influence the customer experience without impacting the customer experience in a negative way. They're still going to have a memorable time. How is that built into the story? How is the zero waste or sustainability lens woven in a way that's memorable so that it does resonate and they enjoy it, and it's just as fantastic as if they'd taken single-use plastic cheap products home with them? Maybe even more so, dare I say more so. So it's easy to assume, and it's hard to know for certain, because as I mentioned when we're talking about the air conditioner setting, like, a lot of guests don't complain, and a lot of guests don't compliment either. Like, most guests are just, they're going through the motions, they'll be polite and pleasant, what have you. And then you've got your outliers at each edge that are maybe a little bit more discerning and have a little bit higher requirements and higher touch and higher needs during their stay. And then you also have the opposite. So it's hard to base things on feedback. It's not a full picture. Not to say that feedback's not important. How you process and how you talk about feedback, complaints, praise, etc. with your team is also really important. But I'd invite you to experiment with this and maybe challenge any thoughts of perceived complaints or expectations that might come up, and just actually see, let's try this. And this can also be part of the conversation as well. Inviting and engaging the guest in that conversation of, we're trying some new things right now. What do you think? We'd love your feedback. Be proactive. Go in there. Ask for it from them rather than waiting for it to come to you. And so, what does that well-designed amenity situation look like? That's a conversation, like so many things, that I would love to see happen in a collaborative way, that you see how this plays out for your unique property. But a great place to start would be to have housekeeping, guest services, procurement, all in the room together, talking about this together, looking at where things are currently coming from, what guest behavior currently exhibits, what local suppliers you could look at instead of importing cheap goods. Is there a local supplier or something that's even like a local flavor that would bring more delight for the guest? What does your guest request messaging look like? Hi, if you need a toothbrush or if you forgot your toothbrush, please reach out. Where's that call to action in the room so that it's easy for guests to find should they need it? And then how are staff trained on this to be able to have that nuanced approach? That if a particularly discerning guest wants something a particular way, how do you solve that problem for them? Where's the scope? So it doesn't have to always be one thing or another thing. There is nuance, there's flexibility, and there is empowering the team to be able to make those decisions and deliver for the guests, because that's the goal at the end of the day. And you get the opportunity to lead that in a sustainable and well-rounded way. I hope this conversation has been useful for you. I certainly love having these conversations myself, and this is just scratching the surface. Of course, there's only so much that we can cover in a short podcast episode. But please do continue the conversation, and I'd be so grateful if you were to leave me a review on wherever you're listening to this podcast. And don't hesitate to reach out if you want to have a deeper conversation about any of the things I've talked about in today's episode. All right, thank you and take care. I'll see you next time on Two Homes.